bell. Yeah, you lift your leg, then you shake it. Do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog. Lift your leg, then you shake it, bell. Yeah, you lift your leg, then you shake it. Do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog, do the jazz dog. And I dance just aesthetically, or ethically very pretty. Jazz dog, it's sturdy. Now's your chance to the canine dance, don't do it like no kid. Jazz dog, keep jazzing away. Do the jazz dog, everybody. Hey.
You've been writing songs for about how long, would you say?
I probably wrote my first song maybe in 70, 69, 70, something like that. It was called Hot Raisin.
Hot Raisin?
Hot Raisin. I don't know why I named it that. And then I wrote one about the soldier, I think was another one, but not very many that in that band and in that time period. I was mainly doing cover stuff, but it was when we started workshopping the La Bamba Brothers that I started writing for serious, day to day.
Right.
Make it sort of what I wanted to do more than anything was write a song.
Yeah.
I didn't write one every day.
Yeah.
But I've written quite a few songs in the last. That was probably 50 years ago. So yeah.
Well, if you wanted to, if you just suddenly said, okay, we need a song about driving in a car, would you be able to just sit down and put something together?
I could probably come up with something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my friends, actually Ralph Stewart, he told a friend of his one time that I could take the phone book and write a song. I'd never tried to do it.
Yeah, that seems like a challenge for you. Well, what do you usually start out with?
Well, I usually just start off by doodling, but it's no one set way. When I first started writing, it was mainly with the music first. I would come up with an idea musically that I wanted to put a melody to, put some words to, and I would sometimes be singing gibberish. I'd just come up with the melody at first, and I'd just be kind of singing some oohs and ahs or e's or just a lot of sounds that sometimes ended up forming into words. But I didn't really have an idea where I was going with it, and I was writing with other people at that time in La Bamba. Our guitar player Warren Sutton, he came up with a lot of great musical ideas, but he didn't really feel comfortable writing words, so he would get me to help him. I would usually record it on a cassette player, figure out the melody, and then I would or a melody. He would usually have a melody though, and I would write to that melody. And so I've written a lot of songs like that too with him back in that period of time. But I wasn't really tuned into the craft of writing that well. It was just sort of the expression. So it was kind of abstract at times. I mean, some of the early songs were goofy, like The Unbelievable Turnip or Mormo Jumbo, or just playing with words and sounds and not really the concept of telling a story as much as more my inner landscape, as weird as it was at the time, but not so much, like I said, the thoughtfulness of what it really takes to be a writer.
Right, and sometimes I would do the same thing, gibberish stuff, and you just you get into some chords, and you find a place in the chords that you kind of like a little melody, so you just kind of start saying some things, and then the kind of gibberish syllables turn into the words that kind of relate to it, and then suddenly you're on a pathway to actually come out with the words you want to put into this song. Right,
it's comforting to hear you say that. And it happened to me another time. I was listening on Fresh Air on a radio, and I can't remember who the artist was, but he was saying the very same thing. He was saying that he would just come up with some crazy sounds, while he was coming up with the melody, and then those things would kind of start forming into words sometimes, and it's sort of a cosmic thing when that happens. But as I've gotten older, I've learned a lot more about the craft of writing.
Right, it's that experience of doing it, and you get more crafty with it. Yeah. Like a lot of your songs, they seem pretty crafty, even from back when you were writing with La Bamba. Who Owns This Cat, which is one of your popular songs that people like because it's has this kind of hook into it that you can, people listen to, and you even
Right.
kind of at the very end of the song you go over that hooks quite a few times to where it really sinks in,
Yeah.
and people really remember that song.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, there's good hooks are really important,
Uh-huh.
because everybody sings along at that part, and you usually have harmony in that part, and you have
Right.
the theme comes through, or the thing that's really bringing people into the song. So they're really important for sure, especially with a real commercial song. But even with songs that are or have got more of an art to them, can really have a beautiful chorus to it, and. So that's what I try to look for now. I try to look for more richness in what I'm writing about and have something really that I want to say,
right, and that's really what it is. It's a personal expression of something, and a lot of times, I come up with the topic first,
Right.
and then I kind of move into, okay, well, I'm going to come up with some chords, or the melody line's already starting to spin in your head,
Yeah.
and then you start sticking those words to where they match the right syllables with it.
Yeah.
And then, the hardest part for me sometimes is once you get the first one down, then, it sounds really great, but you got to come up with a couple more verses,
Right.
and you got to come up with maybe a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bridge if you don't have an instrumental through there.
Right.
And so, I sometimes find that the most difficult part because you've already come up with that melody line,
Yeah.
and so the lyrics have to match that too.
Yeah.
And it has to match with the storyline that you're going with.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is interesting that I've done with, because I work with lyricists too. I work with a couple of guys in particular, Andy Davis and Trip Bloodworth, who have been writing with me, not in the real room, in the real sense of that, but they send me lyrics, and then we kind of negotiate things after I find something that I can do with the song, figure out where that hook is a lot of times. But one thing I've done that really is helpful to them and to me, and any writer can do this, somebody that really likes to write the prose part of it and the poetry of it, is to take a song that you really like and figure out the form of it. And that goes with what you were saying about the syllables, because that's a big part of the craft of songwriting, is you're writing with syllables, because you got beat, you got meter, you got a verse, you got a chorus, you got all these things to figure out that you want to use as your structure. So if you do that and if you just take the lyrics and you write the same way, and when I used to teach high school English, we'd do that with poetry anyway. We called it walking with the masters. You look at what somebody else did, and then you use that form, and you take that poetic form and you turn it into your own lyric, your own story,
Right.
your own song. And you can also see the inner rhyme, not just the rhyme at the end of a phrase, but like A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, or whatever your rhyme scheme is at the end. You find it in sidelines too. So you're really looking at the way people have crafted and the songs themselves. And I learned that by listening to Bob Dylan talk about Woody Guthrie. That's what he did with Woody Guthrie.
Right.
And Woody Guthrie did that with songs that he heard.
Right.
So it's not something that I invented or anybody did.
Yeah, it's passed
Somebody
down.
did, I guess, somewhere. It's passed down as a trick to the trade. And I stumbled across a thing the other day, well, not the other day, but several months ago. Maybe it was a few years ago at this stage of the game. But I found that I'd go to these poetry readings with friends of mine that were performing, and a poem would just speak to me when they would do it. And it was called a villanelle, and I can't remember the rhyme scheme exactly right now, but it's got kind of an A B A B B A, blah blah blah. I'll do some homework, but I'll play those for you later. But there was a phenomenon that I heard this song by a friend of mine. Not a song. I felt a song when he was reading it, and I ended up going up to him afterwards and saying, "Hey, can I get a copy of that? I'd really like to see if I could make a song out of it." And then I did that with another friend. And it was always that same poetic form. So that's a poetic form that, for sure, you could turn into a song. But a lot of it, when you're getting lyrics from other people too, is figuring out where the hook is going to be, or the chorus is going to be, or if there's going to be a bridge. But I've learned that writing that way is kept me writing. Has gotten me to write really strong melodies. I think stronger ones sometimes than I would have, because I'm trying to fit this piece of poetry into a musical thing. So the melodies, I think, sometimes are stronger, and the dynamics are different too, because I'm coming up with things that I would have never done if I'd have just stuck with my chords and my melody. Right. To have that lyric in front of me and work off of it, and there's kind of a magic to it. The more you do it and you just kind of let yourself flow into it, I don't think about it like this would be good in the key of G, or this would be here, or even this would be a style for this kind of thing. It just sort of happens, because I've trained myself over years to just kind of float into that space, and it kind of takes me somewhere.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of the credits on your songs and the songwriting in the bands, it has your name and usually quite other people. Right. So you do seem to, bounce off a lot of people, and sometimes if they give you a piece of poetry, the melody's kind of hidden in there, and you can kind of hear it with the rhythm that they've already sort of developed. Right. And I've written songs with other people too, and sometimes we would come with, they were writing something and you were writing something, and all of a sudden you decide that, well, maybe we could take your part and put it in the middle of this, right, and sort of figure out how to blend it together, and suddenly you got a song, adjust the words a little bit, and it kind of all makes sense. And a lot of songs that you hear of other people's music, you can really tell that they kind of put two pieces together.
Well, the Beatles were famous for that. John and Paul were A Day in Life is like that, and it all of a sudden it goes, to the bridge of that song. It's like, that's totally something that was, I think John or Paul, I can't remember. I think it was Paul had that part. Wake up, get out of bed, and you can tell it's McCartney, Right. And then, it's just interesting to be able to juxtapose those things, and you've probably done it with your own material too. Like, you have a kibble and bit, is what I call them. You got this little piece of something that you really want to remember, and the best thing to do is to record that, even if it's on your phone, so you don't forget it. And then you come back to a layer, you go, I can grab that piece off the shelf, and you finally use that tool, that I came up with.
Like I use a little TAC hand recorder, and I keep it handy, so when I sit down to play guitar, I don't know if I'm going to write anything or not, but suddenly I'm writing something, I kind of like it, so I'll turn that recorder on just to capture it, because for some reason, whenever I've created something and I just go away, and it just goes away too. So having that recorder handy really helps me.
And a lot of times you just get in what we call, in musical terms, or even in artistic, you get in the flow. You get in the flow of what you're doing, because you can do that with lyrics and art, I'm sure, too. A buddy of mine who was an artist used to call it walking with the gods. And sometimes it's like you're just a conduit for something that's you're channeling from somewhere else. And a lot of times when I've had people that in my life that have died, because I've written a lot of songs about my dead friends. In fact, I jokingly say that I should make an album called My Dead Friends. And put all my songs that I've written for old buddies and pals and loved ones. But a lot of those songs were written at a time, like that one I wrote for Burt Norton on the Sweet Bay album.
Right, that's a wonderful piece.
Yeah, that came incredible. Totally through my relationship with him and the studio, and even the Time to Listen line that's in there, I borrowed that from the album that he put out. That was the first album that they put out, was a potpourri of different people who had recorded there.
Yeah, that's a wonderful album.
The Time to Listen was all the time. He loved the music in our rhymes. It was all about him being kind of this force with us, that allowed us to be creative. But that song came through me. It didn't come from me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It came through me. I was channeling Bert when I wrote that thing.
And we had, Adrian's, that's how she described it, and, on our website, is she just feels like she's not really doing it. It's coming from somewhere else
Right.
within her, but she doesn't feel like it just somehow showed up on her or something. And she was able to write this piece of music.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a little bit of a trance, I guess, you get into sometimes.
Yeah. And those are good trances.
Yeah.
And it's really good when you're down and out, and you're feeling, I mean, just emotionally, I don't mean just, and when I wrote Never Gonna Fall, which was on the La Bamba album, the band was starting to fall apart toward the end of that recording of that album, not that particular song. And I think I told you this before, but it was a love song. It was about a broken-hearted lover, and Fred asked me later, said, "Did you write that song about the band?" And I said, "Yeah." He was the only one that picked it up, that I know of. Maybe some other people did too, because it broke my heart when the band broke up. But it was a way for me to sort of channel that energy. A friend of mine, I've gotten past this with my writing, but a friend of mine whose daughter's quite a songwriter, really gifted, and really good singer, and I couldn't believe it when she put out a couple of albums. I was just blown away by how mature her writing was. She's quite a bit younger than me. She's probably in her 40s now, but I saw her. I hadn't seen her in a long while, and I said, "So have you written any new songs?" And she said, "I've just been too happy." She'd gotten into a relationship with a guy who's a musician. I've just been too happy to write, Right. And I could relate to that because sometimes when you're sad, it's a way to sort of channel
to escape
yourself.
and into it and try to release yourself from it.
Right.
But you can write happy songs.
Oh yeah.
And I write songs about encouragement or people to get away from the sadness that they're in and realize that life's very short.
Yeah.
So you don't want to you have to figure out how you want to spend that time.
Well, one of the things that I as I evolved as a writer, or at least it felt an evolution going through me, not just in humble terms, just the experience, the journey of writing, was that I started writing story songs, and a lot of them were in the third person. And that put me in a different place, and a lot of them were historical accounts of things. So Satchel Paige was a big figure in my life, and it was a way for me to reconnect to my dad. So I wrote a song called "Don't Look Back, Something Might Be Gaining on You" that was on the Flip Side album.
Yeah, I like that song.
And that album was written out of the pain of losing my dad, but a tribute really to my father's influence on me. Because one thing about Satch was that particular statement, all the things that he faced in life, all the negativity that was around him, he kept a really upbeat perspective about life. He was able to do that. And to me, that "don't look back, something might be gaining on." If you look at the past too much, especially if there's horrific things in that past,
right.
Then it can bring you down to where you can't function that way. You can't keep moving ahead, And,
well, you can't go back, but you can always you're going forward.
Right.
So you might as well figure out how to make the best of it.
Right.
And I like people like that always have a positive attitude even though things are crumbling around them. Because sometimes it's very hard to have that.
Yeah. And that song is really an uplifting song. I think a lot of people really loved it, and it was wonderful. Like when I sing it in third person, but when Ralph was in the band, he was able to sing it in first person since he was African American, and boy, he sang the hell out of it. And, and I like writing for other people. One of the things about being in a band was that you start writing for the band too. You write to their strengths, and you write to what that they're going to jump on and make it sound even better than you've ever imagined.
You imagine after when you're putting it down and writing it.
Right.
And lost name a friend. Spent 5 years in the pen. It was a state reformatory for all the bad boys, mostly black boys, and I was one of them. This was a nation of racial discrimination, and I became a victim of this system. Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back. Don't look back. There's something might be gaining.
lot of times, that when you first write something and it just kind of sounds plain and kind of okay, but really when you put it in the hands of good musicians that know how to push it up and raise that level of it and project it out really nicely, that makes a lot of difference in the song.
Yeah, and I was always blessed because, I started off behind the curve on everybody who played an instrument in the band, because in La Bamba I was coming from being a lead singer to having a B3 organ and trying to, actually it was a C3 Hammond and a Leslie. I was trying to go to that to be a musician, and I was playing with a bunch of guys that had been playing music, literally playing it for a long, long time, and so I learned something really quick, which if you can improve a lot better as a musician and as a songwriter if you've got really good players with you. So I always tried to play with people that were, that would play with me, that were at least as good or better than me, hopefully better, so that I would be pushed to move ahead, musically too, and be challenged but yeah.
Well, I'm kind of hoping everybody will really check out the songs that we're going to put on your page, because they're really exceptional pieces of music. A lot of, I do photography stuff, and a lot of my photographer friends, they didn't really make it very big. Like I didn't make it that big in photography. I did some stuff and went to California, Japan, and all that, but some of them went to New York City. Yeah. And so they happened to be right there where things were really happening. Right. And so they were really able to be successful. Yeah. And so like a lot of the songs you've written, I think if another band picked it up and took with it, that suddenly it would be a whole different thing. Sometimes they'll take a piece of music. I have like one song I wrote and different bands played it, and it sounds different with each one. Yeah. And each one contributed to it a different way. Right. But a lot of your music I've listened to, I'm thinking like that's just as good as anything that's out there. Yeah. But it's exposure sometimes. Right. Get the right exposure.
Well, I appreciate that. But the thing about it is that I always figured the success of being a writer was really that you still wanted to write. Not because you were looking for the fame or the fortune or any of that. Right. But I mean, it's always nice. I always felt like the same way I feel about my children and my grandchildren, that when people say, oh, they're so cute, or they're so talented, or there's this or that and the other, and they're all, I think I'm so proud of all my kids, they are real cute and they're real special and they're real talented. Even the little bitty ones amaze me. They play the drums and they do things. I know,
I love that picture of them.
And both Ryder and Clara have the musical juju in them, I think they're going to get that, but yeah. But that's the real success for me, is just that I still like to get up in the morning and diddle with it, and I still dream about what it could sound like, and try to record it and present it in a way that I can, be happy with, or at least have it down, even if it's bare bones, so I don't forget it, and maybe somebody in the family will stumble across it and cherish it a little bit too. But one of the songs I was going to tell you about on that little CD that I gave you the other day, that was a compilation, there's a funny story of that one, one on Strange Changes. And I wrote that when I was in La Bamba, but we did it in Flipside too, and then recorded it in the Muffin Men on the, we didn't even put out a record, we put out a cassette.
Yeah, right.
Because everything gone from, with the CDs hadn't really jumped in yet, so it was. So we made a cassette of it, and but Strange Changes I wrote with I always say I co-wrote it with my Ford Econoline van, because I was coming back from the studio and we'd been up pretty late, and my van had a little thrum to it, just a little. It wasn't clunking or anything, but it was just, I could feel this rhythm. Maybe I don't know where I was at, but I was feeling this special rhythm. I started singing along. When by the time I got to the house, I'd written the first verse and had a melody, and I sat down at the piano and started writing the rest of it. And it took me about 15 minutes to write that song, and I still like that song. But it's funny how songs just come out of nowhere a lot of times.
Right.
I wrote Jazz Dog in probably 15 minutes too. I did have the chords first, and I had the melody. And I think I've told you that story before. I was picturing some guy at the at the pastime downstairs, they would have a pole, and it was in a basement of the old pool hall that was upstairs, and the guy was lifting his leg and shaking it on the pole and stuff, like a dog, and I just had that image in my mind.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, this is a goofy thing, and it just started coming out, and it came out like in 15 minutes. I went over to Warren's. He lived in an apartment across from us, and said, I think I got us a hit, man.
Well,
and it didn't make it on the big charts, but it was pretty popular around here for a good while.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. And, some songs come real fast, because one of the most complicated songs I ever wrote, it was when I was probably, 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sort of came to me early one morning. There was some fog out in the yard, and I wrote this song called Early Morning Fog. And I wrote it, it almost just came straight out.
Yeah.
All the words and everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mystery being a writer and coming up with stuff.
Yeah.
And almost sometimes it came from you, but
Right.
you feel like it came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a mystery to it, and just an image can give you that sometimes too. Or a life led. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, I like to write historical songs too. And one of my buddies that I told you I love writing with, another one, Andy Davis. The first song I wrote with him was about the Wright brothers. He was working on a book, and he was writing some songs that kind of went with it. And the first one I saw was the Wright brothers, and it was just amazing. It was about a guy in a bar, watching them talk about it and seeing them go writing some diagrams there while they were having a pint of beer or something in this pub in Cape Hatteras. And I just fell in love with it, Right, I said, you got to let me have these words,
Mm-hmm.
I took it home we were playing in Panama City, and that's where he lived. And he was a bartender at the place we played. I got home and I started working on it right away, and it just came to me just really lickety-split, because the words were speaking to me, just like that image was speaking to you,
Yeah.
And when you hear that sound, you don't even know if it's a sound yet. You just kind of turn it into something, because you're opening yourself up to something that is bigger than you are, in a lot of times. Or at least that's the way I feel when I come across some
words. So what you're
words.
saying is, like, some of them, they just sort of come to you mysteriously.
Yeah.
You get your initial thing that gets you started,
Yeah.
but then it comes. But then other times, sometimes you're really, crafting a song.
Yeah.
You're crafting it to, because it takes you a while to really get it, a long time. Sometimes a piece of music took me a couple of years before I was really satisfied with the direction it went.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always saw that, I call that trying to find the heart of the song.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, for me, has to do with the rhythm, where the rhythm of the song is, the pulse, because, I've doodled around and I'll think, well, maybe this would be good with a reggae thing, or no, maybe it would be good with a blues or a country, or, all over the map before you find really, you like the melody, you like the words, you like everything about it, but you haven't found the right pulse for it yet,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, where's this song going to get the most, the not the recognition, I guess the word would be something, but just the feel that I want, I guess in basic primal visceral terms, it would be the feel of it, that gives the song its merit, for what you see in it, and you want it to express,
Well, what would you think is your strongest thing with your writing? Is it the music and the melody, or the words that you put together for it?
I think it's more than anything, it's been my resilience as a writer. Most people who know me pretty well and have been around me for a long time, they always say, well, what are you working on now?
Mm-hmm.
And I have other friends that have written some really great songs, but they may be a year or two, and that they'll actually complete a song. Not that they're I just have always worked on it. And I think for me, it's just like that. No matter what I've done, even when I was doing other things in life, like teaching high school for 30 years, I was still writing, and I don't see myself ever stopping until I can't do it anymore. I'm either
Right.
dead or infirmed in some way.
Well,
But I
it's
can't.
pretty much the way music is. Music is very capturing, and it captures you, and
Yeah.
then you'll do it, and I feel like I'll probably be doing that and writing songs, and I go through periods where I'll just write a whole bunch of them, and then I go through a really dry period. I don't do much of anything,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden something happens in your life,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you're back at it again, and you got a lot of new things going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you discussing this with us, because
Yeah.
I think it's an important thing, like what Keith always says, is that, if it wasn't for songwriters and composers, the musicians would have nothing to play.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things. I think when I was a younger person, but in junior high school, the groups that I was listening to, that I was the most enamored with, were the ones that were writing their own material. And that was, it started with the Beatles, and then the Rolling Stones to a certain extent. They definitely evolved as writers too. I mean, there was an evolution that you were witnessing as a teenager,
Right.
as a young teenager. You could see those progressions being made.
Right.
Big difference between their early records and their later records.
Right,
The
big
sophistication of what they were doing. They could continue to improve. And Paul Simon's one of my middle son Casey's favorite songwriters.
Ah,
But he wasn't listening to early Simon and Garfunkel to feel that way. He was listening to Paul Simon when Paul Simon was doing Graceland, and that music that he evolved to and kept exploring is what grabbed Casey's attention, especially the South African guitar playing that was going on. That he was infusing with just the expanse, and that's one of the things. There's just a beauty in that growth that you feel as a writer when you just stay at,
Right.
or anything. If you stay playing the guitar, I've never considered myself to be a great piano player or a great musician or a great singer. I'm not saying I'm a great songwriter, but I've gotten to be pretty good over the years just because I've done it, and I continue to do it. And I think anybody with a little bit of talent and a lot of enthusiasm
right.
can go a long way. I mean, there's a lot of guys and gals that don't even sing that well that have written some unbelievable songs. You just
Right.
go, whoa, and then you hear them. There's a guy named Vernon Thompson, who was been around Nashville for a long time, and he's got a barn anyway, and he has all these writers come and hang out with him, and he's had a few people that are, because I've watched several of them. They're on Prime Video, I think, and I wish I could think of the name of that show, but they don't sing very well. They don't play that very well, but they've written songs that have sold a lot of records, and some songs that are just really beautiful songs,
Right.
And so you don't have to really be a singer to be a songwriter.
You get, like we were talking earlier about Bob Dylan,
Right.
and he was great with words, but he was also very good at coming up with a melody line. So a lot of his chord progressions weren't all that sophisticated,
Right.
but he had a unique sounding voice,
Yeah.
and you always knew who it was when he was singing and doing his thing. And the same thing I enjoyed about, like, the Beatles, because when I first started listening to them, I was like, their chord progressions weren't the standards at all.
Right.
They invented chord progressions,
Yeah.
and then put to build their songs.
Yeah, they were going from a lot of major minor in the same song, and and transitions that
Right.
made things really interesting and different. But Dylan, and Dylan was big time with showing up in the studio with just a suitcase full of lyrics,
Yeah.
and making stuff up on the spot, But he did have a way. Just like John Prine. John Prine was the same way, except I think even better in a sense, just because he stayed with the melody. Sometimes Dylan's lost me because he's kind of lost his melodic sense in a lot of ways. But John Prine was simple, but oh so deep.
Right.
His songs are just really. And there was a vibe that he had that was very sincere and very real, that people, I think, really will always cherish, you know. Dylan's got this vast catalog, you know, but there's a little trickery in what Bob does, you know.
I like his album Modern Times because it was really different for him.
Yeah.
He really went off into a bit of more blues music stuff he did. Yeah. But I really appreciate you discussing this, because a lot of people want to, hopefully young people, like when you were teaching, will be able to hear some of this and inspire them to do some songwriting.
Well, just keep at it and follow your dreams. That's what it is about. And sometimes those dreams will take you to a song, you know.
Right, well, I appreciate you coming in to talk about it.
Okay, buddy.
Thank you very much.
All right, John.
That it lit us.
His teeth and claws are staring just like a razor.
He'll cut you deep and he will cut you dead out. Who owns this cat following me around? Who owns him? Who owns that cat? Who owns this cat following me around? Who owns him?
Yeah. His coat is blacker than the blackest night. He's just pretty, but he loves to
cat following me around. Who owns him? Who owns this cat following me around? Who owns him? Tell the truth now.
Half a gangster black and mean. His mother was a fine feline. Yes, she was.
She ran off his daddy, who be fighting all the time. Who owns this cat? Who owns this cat?